This CBR 1000RR was Honda's first ever superbike with a TFT display, rider aids, and a quick shifter.
2017 also marked an increase in horsepower while trying to maintain the physical stature of a 600.
Not to mention all new sexy looks. But just 3 years later, Honda brought out the CBR 1000RR Fireblade. That meant that this CBR was Honda's top spec bike for the shortest period in almost a decade. In fact, some say it takes longer to say CBR 1000RR-R Fireblade SP.
When you pair that with complaints about the electronics and a broken leg for a star rider, it meant
that since all of that happened around 7 years ago, I've always wondered if these bikes really were that bad. So I'm going to spend the next 127 hours or 5.29 days with it to find out. This episode of 127 hours is a bit different because normally I get to borrow a bike, but this CBR is actually my bike that I've owned for the last 5 months. So you would think that I would know it pretty well already, right?
Except that I bought the bike like this. And I've spent those 5 months rebuilding it. So I've probably only got a total of about 69 minutes riding it so far.
But in those 69 minutes, I've already noticed a few immediate quirks.
For starters, the way Honda ships these bikes is ridiculous. This is taking self-assembly too far, even for IKEA.
But assuming you didn't buy yours from a salvage auction, you probably won't have that quirk. But you will have quirky switchgear. The horn is exactly where you expect the turn signals to be, which means that I often look like an asshole. The riding position is pretty upright and comfortable. For a superbike, that is. The bars are pretty close by and also quite high up relative to the seat. For a superbike, that is.
I have to admit, I love the dash animations, even if they're a bit slow sometimes. Also, it's the calmest superbike I've ever ridden around town. It doesn't even get hot that quickly.
And I hate the way that the turn signals in the mirrors stay lit up at all times. I don't know why, but I really don't like it. That's more normal.
Interestingly, it looks like Honda still sell this model in some markets for $17,000 alongside the RR Fireblade.
Honestly, I only found this out when I got my bike and started to do some research. Before that, I thought that the RR Fireblade completely replaced the model that I have. But I think it's kind of cool that Honda offer a sort of budget superbike. It's a whopping $12,000 cheaper than the RR Fireblade. You really are paying for every single letter in that long name.
So for my first proper ride on this bike, I took it out on one of my favorite rides. And to its credit, but to my disappointment, it was everything I expected.
Now, my perception of Honda has always been that they build sensible motorcycles. They're reliable, smooth, efficient. Basically, any adjective you can think of that means sensible rather than fun. Take the engine, for example. It's a 999cc inline 4. Without a doubt, the most analytical approach to a superbike engine.
And that is the exact feeling you get riding it. It's as smooth as a sewing machine, as my dad would say, and the power delivery is more linear than I am. Like I said, around town, you wouldn't believe it has 189 horsepower. But if you don't shift and let the engine spin faster and faster, the rest of that power will arrive, and you'll get enough adrenaline to attend AA meetings or Adrenaline Anonymous.
Hi, I'm Justin. And I'm an adrenaline junkie. Hi, Justin. So maybe smooth isn't always such a bad thing. I mean, even the throttle tube is really light and smooth.
Although the analytical approach does hinder its sound.
In a world with V-twins, V4s and crossplanes, this isn't amazing. The fake SE project doesn't help either, but hey, at least it's not electric. Even living with it goes really smoothly.
The seat height is pretty low for a sport bike, and the edges are rounded over, making it easy for us shorties to flat-foot it at just 5'7", and its lightweight also makes it easy to paddle around.
As for passenger amenities, I haven't put the passenger foot pegs on, so it's really uncomfortable. Plus, my girlfriend's still mad at me because she wanted to try the Honda out. I bet you would never guess how I would describe the styling. Okay, you guessed it. Smooth.
I've never been a huge fan of these CBRs, but for some reason, I think mine looks gorgeous.
I'm not sure if it's the white and black fairings or the beautiful burnt bronze wheels that are also a creative shape, not just a boring 3 or 5 spoke design. Or maybe it's the fact that I accidentally put the badges on backwards and it drives the internet crazy.
Either way, it's got a few sharp points and a few angles where it looks aggressive, but it's mostly just round, aerodynamic body lines.
For example, the air intakes are really subtle. The tail isn't bad looking, just not very unique. Even the headlight is kind of meh from some angles. And there is nothing worse than a completely blacked out windscreen. Except that was my fault. It came with the fairing kit.
I do, however, love the engine covers that match the wheels, and ultimately think it looks a lot more elegant than the stock colors, but still not exactly exciting.
But when you're out riding and in the zone, you instantly care less about styling and more about things like handling, suspension, brakes, and by far the coolest feature, but also its biggest downfall, rider aids.
The handling is deceptive. It takes some effort to initiate a lean and then almost falls over effortlessly, making it super nimble at both high and low speeds. It also has pretty wide handlebars for a stock bike, which makes leveraging it over very satisfying.
One downside is that the rounded seat and narrow midsection makes squeezing with your knees still feel a little unstable. Tank grips might help, or just being taller.
The front half has 43mm Showa big piston forks that are fully adjustable and look neat and tidy.
They're terrible for an entertaining YouTube video because they do exactly what you need and want. There's no drama to talk about.
They're best described as smooth. I'm sorry, I know you're sick of hearing it, but it's the truth.
And the back half has a fully adjustable Showa shock as well. And to be honest, my only complaint is that it's too neat. I want to be able to see my shock. I don't want it tucked away. The brakes, on the other hand, are a little strange.
These 4-piston, radially mounted Tokiko calipers already look super dated, and the front master cylinder is a radial pull, but doesn't even have a brand name on it. And the rear has a single-piston Nissan caliper. For general riding, this is all you'll ever need. Seriously, they're good. But when you start to push, two things begin to hold the brakes back.
First of all, it has rubber brake lines, and it came out at a time when all other premium sport bikes were coming with steel braided lines so that they can't expand and create a squishy feeling lever. Come on Honda, everyone knows that rubber doesn't feel as good. And the second issue is that the ABS can't be adjusted or switched off. So you're forced to endure its intervention whether you like it or not, and at a level you can't dictate.
And remember, this is the analytical and sensible company, so it doesn't kick in right before you crash, like we would want, but way earlier than that instead.
And speaking of things holding it back, we have to talk about the rider aids. First, we have the interface, which is a little bad by today's standards from the likes of BMW and KTM, but was very good for its time and especially for Honda's first attempt.
The screen feels cheap in its plastic housing, but looks good once on. The layout is great, and you can easily find the important data you're looking for at a glance, even at 200 miles per hour. Plus, you can even change the background color. Then at the bottom, it gets a bit messier, with 4 data fields on the right, 3 of which you can customize and cycle through by pressing the mode button on the left switchgear to select the data field, and then these up and down arrows to cycle through it. It works, but it's a bit clunky.
Then on the bottom left, you get your rider modes.
This is where it gets a bit frustrating. You seem to get 3 preset modes, and then 2 user modes that you can customize the power, torque control, and engine braking.
But the biggest issue is that this bike doesn't have traction control and wheelie control. It has what Honda call their selectable torque control, and it clumps wheelie and traction control into one setting.
Honestly, it hasn't held me back on the road, but I do understand why those 2 systems should be separated, and this is one of the main gripes about this bike. But don't forget that this was Honda's first attempt at rider aids on a consumer bike.
But on a brighter note, a quick shifter was an optional extra, and my bike has it.
And I absolutely love it. It's a very neat looking unit, and it works brilliantly anywhere in the rev range.
And notice how I didn't say smooth. But it is smooth. And to Honda's credit, this came at a time when auto blippers weren't super common, and they still included one. So I haven't broken my leg riding it like John McGuinness did, and the electronics haven't completely ruined the bike for me either. But I bet this video is slightly shorter than normal, simply because it doesn't have many quirks to complain about like an Italian bike would, for example. And it isn't super exhilarating either, like a ridiculous naked bike would be. It just ticks all the boxes.
Of course, making a superbike sound boring is an absurd concept, but compared to a 1.3 litre Super Duke or a V4 Panigale that can break a dyno, this little old CBR isn't even in the same postcode. It's still one hell of a bike with all the bells and whistles, and if anything, makes it more rewarding to ride the wheels off it.
But I think this bike was developed in a time when nobody really knew what technology in motorcycles would look like exactly. And this was Honda's attempt at embracing technology, but also trying to simplify it for the average rider. But in hindsight, that isn't what the average rider wanted or needed.
So it's lucky they changed direction so quickly then.
So 127 hours later, I feel like I know my own bike a lot better, and I thoroughly enjoyed riding it the last 5.29 days. So let's see where it stacks up on the scoreboard. After all, it's the first superbike on here. Styling. It's pretty, but not sexy, and I think pretty should be left to the middleweights. I want my liter bike to be sexy. 6 out of 10. Practicality. As far as superbikes go, it's ridiculously practical. You could easily daily ride this. 8 out of 10. Fun. Fun? Kind of. Smooth? Definitely. 7 out of 10. Price. 7 years after its release, it's kind of hard to say. It was probably overpriced at the time, but pretty good value second-hand today. And if they really do still sell these brand new for $17,000, 7 out of 10. But I would buy the Gixxer. Speed. It's deceptively fast because of how smooth it is. 8 out of 10. Sound. Sounds like a Civic without VTEC. 5 out of 10.
Giving the CBR 41 out of 60, placing it just above an F3 and below an S1000 XR.
But anyway, let me know if you would buy this generation CBR today, and I'll see you on the next ride.